After my grandfather left me his $5.7 million estate, my family called me a manipulative thief at the reading. I smiled silently and walked away. Now they're homeless and begging for my help. When the lawyer read my grandfather's will, the entire room froze. All eyes were on me, the quiet, forgotten daughter, who had just inherited everything. My mother gasped dramatically, collapsing into the $3,000 leather sofa. My brother, Jason, pounded his fist on the mahogany table, knocking the lawyer's glasses off. "This is impossible," Jason shouted, his face turning red with anger. "She's done nothing to deserve this. She must have manipulated him when he was weak." Christine, my sister, crossed her arms and sneered, her Cartier bracelet glinting under the chandelier. "Now we know why you visited him so often during chemo. How calculated." Her voice dripped with venom, the same tone she used when I won a scholarship she didn't. I stayed silent in the corner, watching my family's true colors unfold in real time. They didn't care about grandfather. They cared about the money, the same money they'd spent years expecting as their birthright. "Anna, you don't need all of this," my father said, his voice suddenly soft, a complete shift from the man who forgot my college graduation. "We should manage it together. Your brother needs capital for his business, and your sister wants a new house in the Hamptons." They stared at me, waiting for me to hand over the inheritance like I'd handed over everything else my entire life. I just smiled and tucked the papers into my bag. As I walked toward the door, I heard my mother's shrill voice. "Where are you going? We need to discuss this as a family." I turned back one final time. "We've never been a family," I said quietly. "And this isn't the end, it's just the beginning." The door clicked shut behind me, but not before I heard Jason's threat. "She'll regret this. We'll make sure of it." 3 months later, they would be the ones with regrets. For as long as I can remember, I've always been the afterthought in my family, the third child, the one who never quite measured up. Jason, the star athlete, and Christine, the social butterfly, always took center stage. And I was just Anna, the quiet, invisible one. On my 8th birthday, I spent the day alone, waiting for someone to remember. When Mom finally brought out a cake that evening, my heart soared, until I realized it was for Jason's second-place trophy in his basketball tournament. When I pointed out it was my birthday, Mom sighed impatiently. "It's just a birthday. You'll have plenty more. This trophy is important for Jason's future." I blew out someone else's candles that night, wishing to be seen. At 12, I won first place in a statewide math competition. I rushed home, certificate in hand, eager to share the news. My parents were in the kitchen planning Christine's sweet 16 party. "That's nice, honey," Dad said distractedly, not even looking up from the $15,000 venue brochure. "Can you help Christine with her makeup? She has a dance recital that might get her scouted." My certificate ended up in the same drawer that displayed Jason's trophies and Christine's dance awards on the mantle. Jason got a BMW for his 16th birthday, his reward for making the varsity team. I took the public bus through college. Christine's closet overflowed with designer clothes, while I bought everything secondhand. "You're so lucky," Mom would say with a dismissive wave. "You don't care about appearances. Christine needs these things for her social connections." I watched Christine casually spend my monthly food budget on a single brunch, while I worked double shifts at Starbucks to afford textbooks. When I asked for help with tuition, Dad frowned. "You got a scholarship, didn't you? You should be more responsible with your money." Yet whenever Jason needed a small loan for his failed business ventures or Christine wanted the latest iPhone, money appeared instantly. I earned a full scholarship to Princeton, the first in the family to attend an Ivy League school. On graduation day, I searched the crowd for familiar faces. My parents had texted that morning. "Jason has a hangover from the draft party, and Christine's in Cancun. Maybe dinner next weekend." I sat alone while other families took photos and celebrated. There was one person who saw me though, my grandfather. He was the one who slipped me books when I was young, whispering, "You're the clever one. They just don't see it yet." When I got into college, he secretly sent care packages with homemade cookies and notes of encouragement. When everyone else forgot my birthdays, there was always a card from him with a $50 bill. When he got sick with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, I was the one who visited every week, sitting by his hospital bed, while my family showed up only for holidays or when they needed something. "Why do you visit him so often?" Mom asked once over FaceTime, her face filtered and smooth from her spa day. "The nurses are there. It's not like he knows the difference." But he did know. His eyes would light up when I entered the room, and his frail hand would reach for mine. We'd talk for hours about books, my dreams, his life experiences. Not once did he ask me for anything, unlike my family who only called when they needed money or favors. In his final days, as his breathing became labored, he grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "You're the most like me," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hospital equipment. "The others, they only care about what they can get. You care about people." A tear slid down his cheek. "I've watched them ignore you for years. That ends now." He pressed a small key into my palm. "My study, bottom drawer of the desk. There's a red journal. Don't open it until after. You'll know when." His eyes, though clouded with pain, held a clarity I'd remember forever. I didn't understand what he meant then, but I would soon. 1 week later, he was gone. 2 weeks after that, I was sitting in his living room, watching my family's masks slip as they realized just how much he had seen, and and what he had decided to do about it. The week after the will reading, my family called an emergency family meeting at grandfather's mansion. I arrived 10 minutes late, intentionally avoiding the awkward small talk with people who had just called me a thief. When I walked into the grand living room, they were already seated. My parents were on the antique love seat, Jason was pacing by the fireplace, and Christine was scrolling through Instagram, pretending to be uninterested. Mr. Peterson, the family lawyer, sat awkwardly in the corner, his briefcase held like a shield. "Finally," Jason muttered when I entered. "Now we can fix this mess." My father leaned forward, clasping his hands in his business negotiation pose. "Anna, we've been talking, and we think there's been a misunderstanding about your grandfather's intentions." "There's no misunderstanding," Mr. Peterson interjected quickly. "Mr. Hamilton was extremely clear about his wishes. I personally verified his mental capacity on 3 separate occasions. With all due respect," my father's voice grew cold. My father was 87 years old and on heavy medication. He wasn't thinking clearly. My mother dabbed at invisible tears with her monogrammed handkerchief. He wasn't himself in those final months. "Anna was the only one who could visit regularly because she doesn't have real responsibilities," she said, the slight so casual it almost seemed rehearsed. "I visited grandfather because I loved him," I said quietly, my first word since sitting down. "Oh, please." Christine finally looked up from her phone, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've always been so calculating. Remember how you used to follow grandfather around when we were kids? Always bringing him tea, asking about his stories? We all knew what you were doing." I stared at her, genuinely confused. "Being nice to our grandfather? Manipulating him?" Jason shouted. "You made yourself look like the perfect grandchild while the rest of us were living our lives." "By living your lives you mean taking his money and rarely visiting?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. The room fell silent. My father's face darkened. My mother broke the silence with a dramatic sigh. "We raised you for 27 years, fed you, clothed you, put a roof over your head. You owe us everything you have, including grandfather's money?" I asked, not giving an inch. "Especially that," Jason spat. "You think you can support yourself on $5.7 million? You've never even had a real job." My father softened his tone, trying a gentler approach. "Anna, be reasonable. Your brother is starting his business. Christine is looking at houses in Westview. Your mother and I are thinking about retirement. This money could help the entire family instead of just sitting in your account." "The money isn't just sitting anywhere," I said. "I have plans for it." "What plans?" Christine scoffed. "You don't even know how to handle money. Remember when you spent your first paycheck on books?" Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. "Perhaps I should remind everyone that this is not actually up for debate. The will is legally binding." My father waved him off. "Family business, Peterson. Give us a moment." When the lawyer reluctantly stepped outside, my father's demeanor changed instantly. The facade of reasonable discussion vanished. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice low and threatening. "If you don't agree to share this inheritance fairly, you can forget about being part of this family." "Is that supposed to be a threat?" I asked, my tone calm but challenging. My mother gasped. "How can you say that? After everything we've done for you." "You're making a mistake," Jason warned, stepping closer. "You're nothing without this family." "Nothing." For a moment I wavered. Despite everything, these were the only family I'd ever known. Maybe if I shared the inheritance, they would finally accept me. Maybe this was my chance to belong. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Good girl," my father nodded, already thinking he had won. "We'll draw up the papers. 60% to the family fund, 40% for you to manage. That's more than generous." As they began discussing how to divide my inheritance, my phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Peterson. "Meet me at my office tomorrow. Don't sign anything." That night, alone in my apartment, I remembered grandfather's key. With trembling hands, I unlocked his study drawer and found the red leather journal. Inside was not just his personal thoughts, but evidence, documented years of my family's manipulations, detailed records of loans never repaid, and photos of empty chairs at my life events while they celebrated each other. But what made me gasp was a small USB drive taped to the back page with a note, the truth in their own words. When I plugged it in, I heard their voices discussing grandfather's money years before his death. My father's cold calculation. The old man's worth at least $8 million now. Once he's gone, we'll finally get what we deserve. My mother adding, "We just need to keep him happy until then." Small price to pay. And most devastating of all, a conversation about me. "Anna's always been his favorite," my father complained. "We need to make sure she doesn't get more than her share. She doesn't understand our lifestyle needs." I sat in stunned silence as years of manipulation played out in their own voices. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and texted Mr. Peterson. "I need the best estate lawyer you know. I'm ready to fight." I didn't expect my family to accept defeat gracefully, but even I was surprised by how quickly they escalated. 3 days after I refused to hand over the inheritance, my bank called with disturbing news. "Ms. Hamilton, I'm calling about your accounts," the manager said, his voice uncomfortably formal. "I'm afraid we've had to place a temporary freeze on your assets." "What? Why?" I gripped my phone tighter. "There's been a court filing regarding disputed inheritance funds. Until it's resolved, we can't allow any transactions." I immediately called Mr. Peterson, my stomach churning with anxiety. "They've filed for an emergency injunction," he explained after I told him about the bank call. "Your parents are claiming your grandfather was subjected to undue influence and lacked mental capacity when he changed his will. That's ridiculous." He was completely lucid. "I know, Anna, but this is just the beginning." Mr. Peterson's voice grew grave. "They'll try everything to get that money. You need to prepare for a fight." That same afternoon, my phone began lighting up with messages from extended family members I barely knew existed. Cousins, aunts, uncles, people who had never bothered to call on my birthday were suddenly deeply concerned about my manipulative behavior and elder abuse. My Aunt Meredith, who I hadn't seen in 3 years, left a scathing voicemail. "How dare you take advantage of your grandfather when he was sick? Your mother is devastated. You should be ashamed of yourself." By evening, my sister had posted a thinly veiled attack on Instagram. "It's shocking how some people pretend to care about family only when there's money involved. #FakeCompassion, #elder abuse." The post had over 100 sympathetic comments, including several from our mutual friends who now looked at me as some kind of monster. I felt sick. The narrative was being completely twisted, and people were believing it. The next day, I hired Janet Wu, reportedly the best estate litigation attorney in the state. She wasn't cheap, but after reviewing my case, she seemed confident. "This type of challenge is common with large inheritances," she explained in her sleek downtown office. "But they have an uphill battle. We have the lawyer who drafted the will, medical records showing your grandfather's mental clarity, and a clear pattern of you being the only regular visitor." I nodded, trying to feel reassured. "That said," she continued, her expression serious, "this will get ugly. Are you prepared for that?" "I think so," I said, not entirely convinced. "They'll attack your character. They'll dig into your past. They'll try to paint you as calculating and manipulative, and they'll use family secrets against you. Are you sure you want to go through with this?" I thought about grandfather's journal, about 27 years of being overlooked, about the naked greed in my father's eyes when he demanded my inheritance. "I'm sure," I said firmly. Janet nodded approvingly. "Then let's get to work." My first small victory came 3 days later. Janet secured a court order to unfreeze my accounts based on grandfather's medical records and the USB recordings. The bank manager called personally to apologize, and I was able to access enough funds to pay for my legal team and a small apartment security upgrade. What I didn't know then was just how far my family would go. A week later, I hired a private investigator on Janet's recommendation. What he uncovered shocked even me. "They've been planning this for months," the investigator explained, sliding a folder across the table at a quiet coffee shop. "Even before your grandfather died." Inside were email printouts between my father and a shady medical consultant, discussing how to retroactively document my grandfather's cognitive decline. There were drafted statements from 3 witnesses who would testify that grandfather had been confused and easily influenced during his final months. Most disturbing of all was a document titled Voluntary Renunciation of Inheritance, already prepared with blank spaces for my signature. "They were going to try to trick you into signing this," the investigator said, tapping the document. "Make you think it was something else, probably." I felt cold all over. These are my parents we're talking about. My own family. The investigator's expression softened slightly. "In my experience, Ms. Hamilton, nothing reveals people's true character like large sums of money." That night, as I sat alone in my apartment reviewing the evidence, someone pounded on my door. Through the peephole, I saw my father, his face flushed with anger, and Jason standing behind him. "Open up, Anna. We know you're in there," my father shouted. I called building security, but before they arrived, my father's threats echoed through the door. "You think you can fight us? We're your family. We know everything about you. Sign the papers and this all goes away. Otherwise, you'll regret it." The next day, my workplace called. Someone had contacted my boss with concerns about my ethical behavior. Though my boss assured me my job wasn't in jeopardy, I could sense her newfound wariness. Christine's social media campaign intensified. Suddenly, childhood photos of us appeared with captions about how money changes people, and how heartbroken she was that I would tear the family apart for financial gain. Within 3 weeks, I'd received 37 calls from family members, ranging from tearful appeals to vicious accusations. My mother left messages about how I was killing her with stress, and how she couldn't sleep knowing what I'd done. The isolation was crushing. I took leave from work, changed my phone number, and moved temporarily to a hotel where they couldn't find me. The turning point came unexpectedly. One of the nurses who had cared for my grandfather reached out through Mr. Peterson. "I saw the stories they're spreading about you," she said when we met at a quiet cafe. I couldn't stay silent. She handed me a sealed envelope. Your grandfather asked me to give you this if the family ever turned on you. Inside was a letter in my grandfather's shaky handwriting and a memory card. The letter was brief. Anna, if you're reading this, they've shown their true colors. The recording on this card is your shield. That night in my hotel room, I watched footage from a hidden camera in my grandfather's hospital room. There was my mother, visiting only when she thought others were watching, checking her watch impatiently. There was Jason, asking for money while grandfather was receiving chemotherapy. And most damning of all, my father, thinking grandfather was asleep, whispering to my mother, "How much longer do you think the old man has? We need to make sure Anna doesn't get her hooks into him." The next morning, I forwarded the footage to Janet with a simple message: "Time to fight back." Janet wasted no time. The morning after receiving the hospital footage, we met with her full legal team, 3 sharp-eyed associates who specialized in estate litigation. They spread documents across the conference table while Janet outlined our strategy. "We're filing a comprehensive countersuit," she explained. "Defamation, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and attempted fraud. We're also requesting a restraining order against your immediate family members." "Isn't that extreme?" I asked, still struggling with the finality of such a move. "Anna," Janet leaned forward, "they've frozen your assets, tried to sabotage your career, harassed you at your home, and prepared fraudulent documents. This isn't a family disagreement, it's systematic persecution." Put that way, it was hard to argue. I nodded, and Janet continued outlining our approach. For the next month, the legal battle intensified. My family hired an aggressive attorney known for dirty tactics. They submitted affidavits claiming I had manipulated my grandfather, isolated him from the family, and even suggested I had withheld medication to keep him dependent on me. Each accusation felt like a physical blow. Despite the evidence in my favor, I sometimes wondered if the fight was worth it. On my darkest days, I'd replay the recordings from the USB drive, reminding myself who these people really were. My second victory came when the hospital footage was admitted as evidence. The judge's expression grew increasingly disturbed as he watched my family's behavior at my grandfather's bedside. When it finished playing, he looked directly at my father. "Mr. Hamilton, do you dispute that this is you in this recording?" My father shifted uncomfortably. "That's taken out of context, Your Honor." The judge removed his glasses. "I've seen enough. The emergency injunction is dissolved immediately. The inheritance will remain with Ms. Hamilton pending final resolution." Outside the courtroom, reporters had gathered. Someone had tipped them off about the dramatic footage. My father pushed through them, refusing to comment, while my mother hid her face behind large sunglasses. For the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. The narrative was shifting. That evening, my phone lit up with a text from Christine. "We need to talk. Privately." Against Janet's advice, I agreed to meet her at a public cafe. She arrived looking different, her designer clothes replaced with jeans and a simple sweater, her perfect makeup notably absent. "I wouldn't be here if we had any other option," she began, staring into her untouched coffee. Her voice lacked the edge I was used to. She explained in halting sentences. After the failed lawsuit, my parents had spent nearly $200,000 on legal fees, depleting their savings. Jason's cryptocurrency investment scheme had collapsed, leaving him $750,000 in debt to people who weren't the forgiving type. Christine herself had been laid off from her PR firm after the scandal and couldn't make payments on her luxury condo. "I'm sleeping on Melissa's couch," she admitted, her voice hollow. "We have nothing left." As she spoke, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street, its engine running. Something felt wrong. "I need to go," I said, reaching for my car keys. Christine grabbed my arm. "Wait, please." That's when I saw Jason approaching from behind a nearby car, something metallic glinting in his hand. "Don't move," he said, his voice cold. "We're going to your bank. You're going to withdraw $500,000. Then we're done." I looked at Christine, whose fear now seemed genuine. "You knew about this?" "I didn't want to," she whispered. "But we're desperate." "Get in the car," Jason ordered, gesturing toward the SUV. "Dad's waiting." In that moment, all hesitation vanished. These people weren't my family. They were strangers who would do anything for money, even kidnap their own sister. I pressed the panic button on my key fob, setting off my car alarm. Jason lunged forward, but security guards from my building were already rushing toward us, alerted by the alarm. "Help!" I screamed. "He has a weapon." Jason ran, dropping what I now saw was a kitchen knife. Christine stood frozen, then turned to flee, but security caught her before she could escape. The police arrived within minutes. Christine broke down immediately, confessing everything. My father was arrested in the SUV, carrying forged withdrawal documents with my signature. The family that had raised me was now facing felony charges for attempted kidnapping and extortion. The news outlets that had once speculated about my manipulation of my grandfather now ran headlines about the inheritance kidnapping plot. Overnight, the narrative completely reversed. Former friends who had shunned me called to apologize. Distant relatives who had accused me of elder abuse now claimed they always knew something was wrong with that family. A week after the arrests, I received a letter from my mother from the county jail. "I don't expect forgiveness," she wrote, "but I want you to know this wasn't always the plan. We loved you once, before money and jealousy jealousy poisoned everything. I'm sorry we failed you as parents. You deserved better. It was the first genuine thing she'd ever said to me. The criminal case moved quickly. My father and Jason accepted plea deals, 3 years for my father, 5 for Jason with his prior record. Christine received probation for cooperating with prosecutors. As the dust settled, I found myself in my grandfather's study, surrounded by his books and memories. I opened his journal to the last page where he'd written, "Anna, remember that the true measure of wealth isn't what you have, but what you give. Some people will never learn that lesson." He was right. My family had spent their lives chasing money, only to lose everything that actually mattered. I had spent mine seeking their approval, only to find strength when I finally stopped looking for it. I closed the journal and made a decision. The next day, I established a trust fund for Jason's future children and Christine's education, if they ever chose better paths. Not because they deserved it, but because I wanted to be defined by my own choices, not theirs. Standing on the balcony of my new home, I watched the sunset paint the lake in brilliant oranges and pinks. 6 months had passed since the attempted kidnapping, and my former family's actions had proven who they truly were. I'd moved across the country to California, far from the shadows of my past. The sprawling oceanfront property was nothing like the cramped apartment I'd once carefully budgeted to afford. Here I could breathe. Here I could finally live on my own terms. I'd founded Hamilton Consulting, focusing on helping young professionals manage sudden wealth, lottery winners, inheritance recipients, young athletes with big contracts. People who, like me, needed guidance navigating both the financial complexities and the emotional challenges that came with unexpected money. "Your team is Hamilton," said Eliza, my assistant, stepping onto the balcony with a steaming mug. "Thank you," I smiled, accepting it gratefully. "And please, it's Anna." "Old habits," she shrugged with a smile. "The Foster Care Foundation called. They've approved all 15 scholarship recipients for next year. They're sending the files for your review." I nodded, a warm feeling spreading through my chest. The True Family Foundation I'd established with a significant portion of my inheritance was already changing lives, providing education, housing, and support for children who, like me, didn't have the family support they deserved. Some days, I still found myself reaching for my phone to share good news, before remembering there was no one to call. The phantom pain of those missing connections would probably never fully disappear, but it was getting easier. Inside, I carefully placed my empty mug next to a framed photograph, one of the few family mementos I'd kept. It showed my grandfather and me on my college graduation day. He'd been the only family member to attend, making the trip despite his failing health. In the photo, his hand rested proudly on my shoulder, both of us smiling widely. "To my beloved Anna," he'd written on the back, "who will surpass us all." As night fell, I walked through my home, truly my home, filled with books I loved, art that moved me, spaces designed for my comfort rather than anyone else's approval. A home where no one would demand my sacrifice, belittle my achievements, or make me feel small. My phone chimed with a message from Dr. Melissa Chun, a child psychologist who worked with my foundation. "Just met with Lily, 14, who received our scholarship. She asked me to thank the lady who understands what it's like. You're changing lives, Anna." I smiled, tracing my finger over the words. This was what grandfather had wanted for me, not just financial security, but purpose. The means to build something meaningful from the ashes of what had been denied. The inheritance had never been about the money. It had been his final effort to show me my worth when my family had spent a lifetime convincing me I had none. Sometimes people ask if I miss my family. The truthful answer is complicated. I miss the family I wished I had, the one that would have celebrated my achievements, supported my dreams, and loved me unconditionally. But that family never existed except in my hopes. What I've learned is that family isn't defined by blood. Family is built through respect, appreciation, and genuine care. I see it in the grateful letters from scholarship recipients, in the genuine concern of my small circle of trusted friends, in the community I'm carefully building around me. Last week, I received a letter from Christine, her first since completing probation. "I'm enrolled in community college," she wrote, "working at a coffee shop to pay tuition. For the first time, I'm earning something instead of taking it. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that some of us can change." I didn't respond, but I didn't throw the letter away either. Perhaps someday there might be room for a different kind of relationship, not based on the past we shared, but on the people we're becoming. Standing in my living room, surrounded by the life I'd created, I finally understood the true gift my grandfather had given me. Not the money, substantial as it was, but the permission to value myself when no one else did. The courage to stand firm when it would have been easier to bend. The wisdom to recognize that sometimes walking away is the strongest choice you can make. They had chosen my sister over and over again, and in doing so, they had forced me to choose myself, to find my strength, my voice, my boundaries. For that unexpected gift, I was finally able to feel, if not gratitude, then at least peace. That night, after my parents had left and Lily was asleep in her crib, David and I sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the twilight sky. "How do you feel?" he asked, his arm warm around my shoulders. I considered the question carefully. "Proud," I said finally. "Not because they finally finally showed up, but because I know now that I would have been okay if they hadn't. Because I finally understand that my worth doesn't depend on their approval. He kissed the top of my head. "You're an amazing mother," he said. "Lily is lucky to have you." "We're both lucky," I corrected him, leaning into his embrace. "We have each other. We have Lily. We have a home filled with love instead of competition. That's more than enough." As the night deepened around us and the house behind us sheltered our sleeping daughter, I felt a sense of completion I'd never experienced before. Not because all the broken pieces had been magically fixed, but because I had finally learned that some things are more beautiful in their mending than they ever were when whole.